Welcome everyone to MTG Rebellion's Deck Tech and Sideboard Guide. I'm Darth Riktus of the Dark Stream, and today we're going to walk through Selesnya Enchantress.
I'm Max Damage. You may recognize this deck from the finals of the recent Pizzabox Open Standard this past weekend. Darth Riktus went 9-2 overall, made a run for sure, nearly took down the whole tournament. I say it was the best deck in the tournament, just didn't come out on top. But I'll let Riktus take over.
Well, let's, as always, comment below if you have any questions as we talk through this archetype. In terms of whether it was the best deck or not, I will freely say that I punted game one of the finals, which kind of ruined my ability to argue one way or the other. But I will say that the individual I lost to in the finals was the same individual that got scooped into the top 8, and we played it out just for fun after I scooped him in, and I did take that one 2-0. So I know it's possible to beat the deck that I lost to in the finals. At a bare minimum, it's very possible. So let's go ahead and get on to the upkeep step so you can see the update to the deck.
Whoa, this is an old deck, new cards. Let's I'm really excited to talk about this one because this is one I played like 6-7 months ago. So let's talk about the revision.
Absolutely. So there are some different pieces that I think are worth covering really quickly. The first is that you do need the ability to get enough basics for Ossification, and that's part of why when we went from the usual, you see a lot of these decks on 22 lands and 2 Commune with Spirits. I had too many flooding out issues, so I went up to 4 Commune with Spirits, we went down to 20 lands, and then we had to cut an overgrown farmland in order to hit the 9th basic, so that we mathematically had enough basics to ensure, or come close to ensuring, an Ossification can happen on turn 3 at a roughly 90% of the time. Now, the Commune with Spirits also help that flooding issue as the game goes a little bit longer, and that's part of why we went with the Commune with Spirits over just playing a few more lands. What I love about this build is that it's 20 lands. There's not a lot of times in Standard I've gotten to play that few. Like, mostly in Standard you're like just gonna play 23, 24, maybe as many as 27, but it's rare you get to see the outliers where you're only playing 20 lands and it feels correct. This is one of the few decks that gets to. I will quickly say that when you're looking at the math, there's an old Frank Carson article that discusses cards such as Commune with Spirits and what they count as for a land count. The count is roughly 0.74, so we'll just round it up to 0.75 and count 4 Commune with Spirits is essentially 3 lands, which puts us up to 23 lands, which means we are 93%, a little more than 93%, to hit our 3rd land drop on curve. If we need to take a turn to play Commune with Spirits, it's a slightly slower start, but we don't always have Generous Visitor on turn 1, so that's an acceptable scenario, to me at least. Max, do you have any questions in particular as you're looking at this list versus the other builds?
Yeah, so a couple of things that are missing from this build that I used to play with, and you can tell the folks at home why these choices are preferable. One big thing is back in the time where I was playing this deck, Weaver of Harmony was sort of the new thing, and people were using it to copy some of these jail enchantment spells. Borrowed Time was one of the big ones. Circle of Confinement, definitely. We have Ossification now. Tell the folks at home why a 3-drop Borrowed Time, or another one used to be like Nahiri's Binding, the 3-drop jail cards, why are they not in this list?
I think Standard has gotten to a point where your 3-drops need to be haymakers that do 2 things. And we talked about this a little bit earlier. Step 1, it needs to have an ETB effect. Now, the prison decks, or the prison cards, have that. Borrow Time, Seal from Existence, they all have an ETB effect that's potent. What they don't do is step 2, which is snowball a game. What you see with Calix here, what you see with Wedding Announcement, are cards that have immediate impact, and then if they are left unchecked, will take over the game on their own. And that's something that these Borrowed Time cards don't do. Hence, I wanted those jail cards to be at 2 mana or less. Or less didn't happen, obviously. We didn't get any of those, but we do have good 2 mana options. We've got the Ossifications in the main, and as you can see, there's 4 Circle of Confinement. Obviously, the alternate text and art on this one, since it's called Van Helsing's Holy Word, apparently. But
I do love the alt art, though.
Right. I mean, it's cute. And it was relevant exactly one game against Mono Red where we got to exile a vampire. We got the Bloodthirsty Adversary,
Nice.
And then if they wanted to play a second one, we gained 2 life. So I saw the contemplation before they played the second one. It's a rare thing, but it happens every once in a while. The point being, if it's 3 mana or higher, it better be one hell of a haymaker, and Borrowed Time doesn't really do that. Uh, Outside of that, are there other cards you don't understand why they aren't included in this list in particular?
Maybe let's ask about an inclusion. Now I know Audacity is new.
Hmm.
I love the one drop Audacity. That really helps make this deck shine. I think what it was missing before was a really good one drop enchantment to get things going. The one that I questioned because I refused to use it during the time that I played was Teachings of the Kirin. Talk to us about the value in that saga.
Absolutely. So I'll start with the Audacity. The reason it got placed in is because it combos with Calix. And the ability to Audacity any creature while Calix is on the board means you can go like turn 1 Generous Visitor, turn 2 Audacity on it. Now it's a 4/2 swinging. That's very aggressive. But let's say that they stumble and they don't answer it and you get to play Calix. Now you're going to have, after Calix hits, a 6/4 with Trample that when it hits will copy the Audacity yet again because of Calix's trigger on an enchanted, non-legendary enchanted creature, deals combat damage. So you're seeing how it snowballs with Calix, and that's why Audacity is allowed to be in this deck. Otherwise, I don't know that it would be strong enough despite all the triggering it does for other cards. Teachings of the Corinne, I believe this really was included as a way to mitigate Invoke, because if you play this, and then they get to Invoke in a turn or two after, or let's say even directly after, all they're doing is costing you 2 life while they get to replace Invoke, and they're taking their entire turn to do that. So in a weird way, this is like Time Walk Invoke. And that's part of why it's so strong, while simultaneously still triggering Generous Visitor, Kami, Calix, coming in cheap off Jukai. Like, it has a lot of natural pieces that work well with it. You even get to trigger it with Weaver if you'd like to. So it's got some interesting different pieces to it. It's a fill-all to deal with the fact that Rakdos and Grixis are so into Invoke right now.
All right, very cool. That's all of my questions for today. Speaking of Grixis, let's go ahead and jump into the matchups if you're ready.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All right, minute on the clock. How do we sideboard against Grixis midrange?
So I got to play and beat this matchup at least 3 times on Sunday. My board plan's very simple. You're going to board in 4 Surge of Salvation. You're going to board out 4 Audacity. The point of this is that they are pushing into more spot removal post board, and they're often still leaving an Invoke to spare due to lack of room to board out. There's just not enough things they can get rid of. So Audacity becomes high risk, and it gets pushed out in favor of additional protection in the form of Surge of Salvation. And that allows you to do some intriguing alpha strikes as well. People don't read the full text of Surge of Salvation, but I had multiple times in the tournament where I realized what I could do is I could swing the whole board. They're going to block a 4/4 with Shieldred, and they're expecting it to die, and you just Surge so that the Shieldred does 0 damage, and the rest of their board are all red and black creatures. They do 0 damage to your creatures, so you just get to pound through. And you can set up these weird overrun effects with it where they don't trade favorably because of the Surge, and they lose like 3/4 of their board.
Whoa. Okay. Yeah. Surge of Salvation, really cool addition to this deck. Really cool addition to just white in general, encountering some of the strategies that people have been complaining and talking about in Rakdos and Grixis. So yeah, very good addition. What other sort of are there any other sort of synergies within this that work well against this sort of archetype that you saw play out during the pizza box?
There were times where I was boarding in a Lauren, and I'm going to say straight up, this was because people were boarding incorrectly against green-white, and they were leaving in Reckoner Bankbusters. Because if they're they're going to have the 4 Fables, and a lot of people are on like, oh, we play Lauren to deal with Fable. You don't. You're already behind. You ignore the Fable. Sometimes what you'll do is you will Ossification the Fable token so that they don't get the ramp effect, and so that when they invoke, you can just sack the Ossification and nothing comes back out of it. So it's kind of a weird effect you get to do with that. But Lauren is not there to answer Fable. It occasionally does it if you end up boarding it in, but it's there if they're also leaving in like 2 to 3 Bankbusters, which, by the way, Rakdos Grixis players, don't do that. Think of it like Esper Legends. It's too slow. You don't want Bankbuster. What you want to be doing is killing shit. You don't want to be trying to spend 4 mana to draw a card, because that's too late. You're already run over. But when they made that mistake and I saw it and we went to game 3, I'd board in 1 Lauren, usually over one of the slots, and I don't have it anymore. It was in the old build, was the Ozolith was in as one of. At this point, I'd probably board it over the 4th Weaver of Harmony. And use that as a way to punish them for keeping the bank busters in while simultaneously getting a little bit of an edge on the fables. I don't think it's necessary for fables or correct, but sometimes you have a Lauren in hand, they don't have a bank buster, but they do have a fable. What are you gonna do? You play the fucker, you know?
Thank you. Yeah, that is definitely one matchup I'm really concerned about, especially when playing something low to the ground like this, is getting overwhelmed by a deck like Grixis or even Rakdos going over the top. Speaking of, are there any differences in how we sideboard against Rakdos? Let's do it. Minute on the clock.
So the sideboarding here for green-white Enchantress against Rakdos, let's call it burn mid-range, we can call it breach mid-range, whatever you want to call it, all the different variants, they all get sideboarded the same. Whichever variant of Rakdos you play against, you're still boarding in 4 Surge of Salvation, and you're still boarding out 4 Audacity for the same reasons we espoused with Grixis mid-range. And the thing to remember here, we are the aggro. We push tempo, we push disruption. At no point can we be the deck that sits back and does nothing. When that happens, you lose that game. If they have the chance to bring their full potential, all of their resources to bear as a Grixis or a Rakdos player, you're going to lose. You do not have better card quality, you do not have inevitability. What you do have is the ability to explode the board state over the course of a few turns and force them into unfavorable positions that they can't get out of. And that's really where you want to shine, and that's what Surge of Salvation does, is it allows you to get into these really awkward board states for them, where they know you have it and they can't do anything about it.
All right. Not too much difference there in how you, no difference really in how you sideboard, but big difference in how you think about these mid-range decks. Definitely, does the fact that, my one question, does the fact that Grixis has counter spells change up this matchup? Does it make it, more in favor of Grixis when you're playing against it versus Rakdos? How do these two matchups compare?
I actually think the Grixis matchup tends to be a little easier because they have more potential to stumble on their mana base, and anytime they stumble, you just giggle and win. If they time walk themselves with an extra Xander's Lounge, or that Blackcleave Cliffs or Dark Slick Shore comes into play tapped on turn 5 or turn 4, these are awkward moments that they can't get out of, and in many cases cause them to play spells they don't want to be playing that aren't equipped correctly to deal with the board state. So I think Rakdos is a harder matchup for us than Grixis. The counter spells, we get under. I mean, look at the mana cost of our stuff. We don't care about Make Disappear that much. We can play around it. I had multiple scenarios where I did play around it, where I'd sit with 3 lands and a 2-drop and a 1-drop, and I'd be like, all right, here's the Sacrificial Weaver of Harmony, and you countered it. Fantastic. Now we're going to Audacity that and smash right through. And we're still getting the trigger from casting Weaver of Harmony for Kami and for Generous Visitor, so they can counter it all they like. We already got the effect we really wanted out of it.
Very cool. And yeah, even at 2 colors, you are at the advantage in being the aggro and having the better mana base that works out more of the time, and not really needing the mana base. You can run the deck off of 2-3 lands, really, I've found in my experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's flippity flip over to the control side of things and talk about white control. How do we sideboard against white control?
I haven't played against this matchup a ton. I want that disclaimer out there. But the plan, as it stands, is you board in 3 Invasion of Gobakhan, 3 Lorn of the Third Path, and you lose all 4 Wedding Announcements and 2 Audacities. The reason for this is that the long game just doesn't favor us. We want Invasion because we need to be disrupting the upper end of the curve, and we need an additional layer of protection and tempo from what they're doing. Invasion also, if you get it going, and you get it going quickly, can give you a position where you're just ticking up creatures in terms of counters as they swing through, and the opponent has to find sweepers that are exile-based. Like, they have to get to Sunfall, they have to get to Farewell, and if you're lucky, you already hit those with Invasion and time-walked them 2 turns on that. This white deck doesn't have ramp. So if you Invasion, it's particularly effective here because you are setting them back 2 turns. There's no way to ramp past it. Lorn, on the other hand, you know how many enchantments white control runs. Between Ossifications, Wedding Announcements, Restoration of Aganjos, there's a ton of enchantments. They got 4 Bankbusters too. You play Lorn, you blow shit up. It's pretty basic. You're just using it for tempo.
All right, yeah, Lorn is going to be the key here, as it is in so many of these matchups, actually. So, nice little piece there to add to everything, to add to the discussion. How do you see this matchup playing out most of the time? I know you haven't. Let's theorize a little bit. You haven't had to play against this recently, but how do you see this matchup playing out?
I think it's going to be very draw dependent on their end. It's going to depend on whether they get the early pieces of removal or if they get the grindy pieces instead. Like if they're curving, like lay down, like you play Generous Visitor, they lay down arms. You play your 2-drop, they Ossification. You play a Calix, they push a Wedding Announcement. You play another spell, they push Wandering Emperor. You know what I mean? Like those are hands you're not going to win. But the hands where they're like, oh, Ambitious Farm hand, that's kind of like a Time Walk. Bankbuster, kind of a Time Walk. There's a lot of cards they play. Restoration of a Ganjo is kind of a weird one where sometimes it feels like a Time Walk and sometimes it feels kind of damning because then they're flipping Ossifications in out of their hand free on the second part of the saga. So it just feels extremely draw dependent, and it also depends on how they board, how they build. You know, if they're on 4 Sunfall, good luck. If they're on 0 Sunfall in the main or 1 Sunfall in the main, it feels a lot better. But Sunfall is terrifying. There's no way to deal with it, and Farewell's even worse. I mean, Farewell wipes literally every part of our board out. So if they get there, they get there. Your job is to put so much pressure on that they have to have it on curve correctly or they lose.
Yeah, well said. I think that's definitely the case here. Mono White has this deck's number with those cards if they get there. Invasion of Gobakhan hopefully disrupts them enough that you aggro them out before they get there, and I think that's the key here. All right, let's talk about the other huge control list that's seeing a lot of play, Domain. Talk to us about the intricacies of defending against this Domain control list.
For Enchantress against Domain, I'm going to do the 3 Invasion of Gobakhan. I'm going to do the 3 Lorens again, and I'm also going to do this Michiko's Reign of Truth. We're going to board out the 4 Wedding Announcements and 3 Audacities. I want it known this is not an amazing matchup. I consider this to be the hardest matchup, as weird as it sounds. If they curve in a meaningful way, we almost always lose. Like if they get that turn 2 Leyline or Ossification to make sure that we don't have too much snowballed tempo, and they push that into Topiary Stomper, into Invasion, then they're on the plan for a turn 5 Atraxa. I've never beat a turn 5 Atraxa with this deck. It just hasn't happened. So it's really rough. Invasion of Gobakhan's good, but it gets mitigated by the fact that they're ramping past it. So I've had scenarios where I did Invasion of Gobakhan and I hit Farewell and it's at 8 mana. They still play it on turn 6. That's a little rough. Michiko's is my test slot. I don't know if it's correct, but it's designed to fast track our tempo and give us the occasional free game where the board gets a little clogged.
Okay. I've thought about 2-3 copies of Michiko for this matchup. Is that something that we may do in the future, or do you think that with this sideboard that it's sufficient to sort of out aggro? Because that seems to be the strategy all around, really, with this deck, is to really get underneath all these bigger decks. Do you think that's possible with the one Michiko's Reign of Truth, or do we need more?
It's absolutely possible. I'm not sold on all 3 copies of Lauren, and I'm not sold on all 3 copies of Gobakhan. I think 2 copies of Gobakhan will definitely prove out, and I think at least 1 Lauren will prove out. But what to do with the other potentially 3 more slots that we could pick up, they could all go to Michiko's in the end. It depends on how good it is. I need to test it out more, frankly. I don't know for certain here. It'll also be, I mean, in a week we're going to see bans. So I'm very curious to see whether we have Wedding Announcement and Calix. Because if Wedding Announcement's gone, this deck fundamentally shifts into an even more aggressive build probably and plays 4 Michiko's in place of it.
Yeah, I could say that I played with the 4 Michiko's main board back in the day, but I don't know if that was because of lack of options or just how powerful the card is, but I definitely see that as a potential move if we're talking about bans. Okay, so the strategy so far for a lot of these major, bigger decks is to get underneath. Is it going to be the same for Esper Legends? How do we sideboard against Esper Legends?
Absolutely. For Green-White Enchantress against Esper Legends, and I'll put this addendum, this is going to be how you sideboard against a number of other aggressive decks, depending on it depends on who's the aggro and who has inevitability. Esper Legends has Shieldred, it has inevitability on us. So I'm boarding out all 4 Wedding Announcements, I'm boarding in all 4 Circle of Confinements, and I'm saying that we are the aggro, we are the tempo, and all we are trying to do is land our threats quickly, efficiently, and use our Circle of Confinements and Ossifications to wipe out their 3 and 4 drops as need be. Whether it's Shieldred, Rafine, Adeline, those are really the ones we're most concerned with. Circle of Confinement obviously isn't going to take care of Shelly, but it takes care of their 3 drops, which snowball the game for them. And that's why we push that direction. So we got to push the narrative down their throats that we are the faster aggro deck, and this is a good deck for that. They're on limited removal. When they don't have a lot of removal, this deck can just blow up. You can get 8/8 Kamis really fast if they don't have answers.
Yeah, I think leaning on Circle of Confinement is a wise choice here. You definitely want to get rid of their key pieces, and that's the disruption against Esper Legends, is getting rid of those key pieces. And yeah, that's definitely possible with the 4 Circle of Confinements. You want to get rid of, Rafine, Sheldred, Rona. Yeah, okay. So yeah, I guess that answers my major question. Is a lot of these decks we're really trying to get underneath, get underneath before they can go off with the combo. And the bans, I guess, are going to be focused around sort of disrupting a lot of these big game strategies, from what I'm guessing, if I had to guess what they're going to ban soon. So I think potentially this deck could become one of those decks that rises up a tier after the bans. What do you think about that?
It'll really depend on what they ban, right? If they ban Wedding Announcement and Calix, which they could, I actually anticipate a Wedding Announcement ban. But if they also snag Calix, this deck is going to be really rough to pull together because it's missing all its haymakers. If they just ban Wedding Announcement, we're probably just throwing in Michiko's over that. And I don't know the exact numbers on that because I think it's important to note Michiko's is one of those cards that's amazing when your opponent does not play a lot of removal. When they play a substantial amount of removal, Michiko's gets way worse because all of a sudden you're running out of targets and it's coming in and it's not very big, it's not very impactful. But this is why I like it against Domain. They don't have a lot of removal. So you have the ability to take Michiko's and give creatures +5/+5 for 2 straight turns. That's a hell of a thing to get for 2 mana. When you're only getting +1/+1, maybe, that's when it's not great, which happens against decks like Rakdos and Grixis, which is why I've cut it from the main.
Yeah. I could also potentially see another direction with the deck, it going back to a more between aggro and between mid-range sort of list with, a couple of copies of Hallowed Haunting, Catilda, the 3-drop Catilda, depending on the bans, depending on how much they gut the mid-range game plan coming up. So I could see that as well. You have any final thoughts for the people at home on this deck and your performance playing it in the pizza box?
I'm a little leery of the mid-range build with Hallowed Haunting. I tried it, and here's why. Let's say they ban all the things we think they're going to ban, but they leave Farewell in. Hallowed Haunting isn't great against decks that are going to run Farewell, and if they leave Farewell in, there's going to be decks that run it, whether it's Jeskai Control or Mono White, whatever survives the banning sequence. Farewell's too strong not to be played in a control build, and when that happens, Hallowed Haunting gets substantially worse because Hallowed Haunting is kind of like saying, okay, we're adjusting, we're shifting into a mid-range deck. Now we have inevitability because we have Hallowed Haunting, and the presence of Farewell suggests that no, you don't.
Yeah, let's not forget about that card. And that's one of the reasons I hated that card for so long, was I was trying to make Selesnya Enchantments work.
Right.
But I like the list. I like Enchantress. This seems to be a really solid aggro build. Thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Yeah, happy to help. It was a hell of a run. It's a good time. I've been having fun with it on the Mythic ladder. So, we got like a week left before the bannings, I think. I would just be running this, frankly. Unless you want to play Invoke Mirror matches all day, this is what I would be playing.
And I don't. That's not fun.
No, that's why I built this, because I was tired of playing Invoke first Invoke and look who top decked the Invoke number 4. It just got tiresome. So this is fun.
Fair enough. All right. Comment below if you vibe with this list. If you don't, especially so, give us any questions, any comments you have. If you disagree with our choices, let us know. We try to interact with everyone in the comments. I think we're on a 100% response rate still, so let's keep that going. Like and subscribe, and that's anything and everything on the list. From everyone here at the Rebellion, don't forget, untap, upkeep, resist.